Many people don't believe that haunted houses are a real thing. They say that all those stories about spirits remaining in a particular physical space, terrorizing anyone who approaches that area, are nothing but fiction designed for entertainment or for scaring gullible people. Usually those spirits that remain in the zone between our world and the afterlife have a reason to be there. Something ties them to our reality, most likely some sort of goal or mission to fulfill. The intentions of those spirits depend on their particular goals, and also on the way they died. And the most dangerous spirits are the ones looking for revenge. Our story starts in the summer of 2005, starring the Tiga family. Its members could have never imagined everything that would happen to them, and if they did, they would have never moved. They decided to move to a different house when they noticed that their son, Fran, who would usually get excellent grades in all his exams, started to fail them. His parents didn't know what was happening, so they decided to observe him more closely. One day, the teenage boy said he was going to the park to play some soccer, but his mother followed him from a distance. Then she saw that he lied to them. The son got into a car with another group of young people who were infamous for causing trouble everywhere they went. When Fran arrived home that night, his mother was waiting for him in the living room. She was so angry that her screams were heard through the entire building. She was extremely worried about her son's future, so she decided that they would move out of there as soon as possible. Some had already warned her about how that neighborhood wasn't the best one to live in, but that's the only one the family could afford. The Tiga family was poor and survived on a single salary. The mother had been looking for a job for a long time, but all the jobs she could find offered extremely low salaries or had terrible work conditions. However, even though she wanted to accept any of those jobs, her husband would insist in waiting until she could get a better opportunity. Soon they called a real estate agency. When the family told them their budget, the agency told them that there were very few offers within that price range, and all of them were in areas which would be much worse for their son's development. They decided to stay where they were, although they would have to control Fran much more, so he wouldn't interact with bad people. However, 2 days later, the father received a call. A house became available near one of the country's best schools, and for an unusually low price. Soon after the family learned about this, they got in the car and went to visit the house to check it out and see if they would rent it. It was a long trip that lasted many months, and they almost had a car accident that would have taken their lives for sure. They were exhausted even though they stopped several times during the trip, but as soon as they saw the house's exterior, they all felt energetic once more. They knew that was the correct house because a woman was waiting for them at the front door to give them a guided tour. On the outside, the house was very well taken care of. It had 3 floors and a beautiful yard. They calculated that the rent should cost about 10 times what they were actually going to pay for it. On the inside, the house was even better. The wood of the banisters and floors seemed to be of very high quality, and all the rooms included luxurious furniture. The only problem was that the basement had suffered a flood a few years ago, so it was now inaccessible. The couple was in love with that house, even though Fran still preferred to live in their current house. And there was also the option of fixing the basement in the future. When they finally ended the tour, the guide asked them if they wanted to rent the house. At the same time, both the husband and wife enthusiastically said yes, and that they would start moving their belongings to their new house as soon as possible. The next day, a moving truck arrived in front of their current house, waiting for all their belongings to be loaded. They met with the previous landlord, gave him the keys, and drove away without missing in the slightest that place that they had spent so much of their lives in. School wouldn't start for another month, so Fran's parents knew he would feel lonely and bored during that time. So once they settled in their new house and rested for a while, the 3 of them went out to familiarize themselves with the neighborhood. They walked around the area and were amazed at all the luxurious cars and gardens they were seeing all around. Once the family came back, they noticed that their front door was open. They thought it could be some sort of prank. It made no sense that on their first day there, burglars would break into their house when there were fancier houses to rob in that neighborhood. But unfortunately, it was not a prank. Whoever broke in left the living room a complete mess, but didn't steal anything. The family then called a locksmith to reinforce their front door. The locksmith changed the lock, but warned the family that the door had not been forced open, so they had to be careful about who they gave copies of the new keys to. That very night, Fran had a nightmare where an old man with his clothes covered in blood ripped out his own head in front of him. Then, paralyzed in fear, Fran observed how the decapitated man walked towards his parents and then murdered them brutally. He woke up with his heart racing and drenched in so much sweat that he took a few minutes before noticing that he actually peed the bed. And despite how embarrassed he felt, he still went to look for his mother. When he told her what happened, she hugged and comforted him. She told him that it was just a nightmare and that he could take his bed sheets and sleep in the living room. Fran did so, although he slept with the light of a small lamp on. The next day, Fran was noticeably tired and his entire body ached, especially his neck. He tried to not give it importance and assumed it was due to sleeping on the sofa. He had breakfast and went to his room to change his bed sheets. However, as he was going up the stairs, he saw something strange on the hall's mirror, and when he looked at it more closely, he froze in shock. Instead of his reflection, he saw the same old decapitated man from his nightmare. Fran turned around and yelled to the top of his lungs, pleading for help. The mirror then fell to the floor on its own, breaking into thousands of tiny shards. Fran's parents rushed upstairs, and after seeing that their son was fine, they grabbed a broom and started to sweep off the shards. The father was the one who threw all the mirror shards in the garbage, but noticed that some of the fragments were stained with something. He inspected them more closely and noticed that they had blood on them, even though Fran didn't have a single wound on his body. A couple of weeks later, Fran's first day of school finally came. His mother prepared a special breakfast for him, so he would leave home feeling happy. He ate it but didn't feel much hunger due to the nervousness. He then finished getting ready and put on his backpack. And once Fran was going out the front door, a black cat holding something in its mouth suddenly appeared in front of him. The cat quickly approached Fran, left what it was holding by his feet, and rushed to the yard and beyond. The teenage boy, barely understanding what just happened, looked to the ground and saw the little gift the cat had left him, a dead crow. Scared, Fran rushed back home crying, looking for his mom once more. However, when the mother went out to verify what her son was saying, she found nothing outside. It's as if the dead crow vanished into thin air. She got mad, thinking he wanted to miss his first day of school. Then she grabbed the keys of her car and ordered Fran to get into the vehicle. She scolded her son on the way to school, and when they arrived, she waited for her son to go in to make sure he wouldn't try to miss school. At least Fran would make new friends that day. The teacher knew a student would arrive and wanted to help him out by making him introduce himself to his classmates, and he was well liked from the very first moment. During the half-hour recess, Fran spent that time with the group of teens that always got the best grades. He finally felt that he fit in and could have many different conversations with them. With his old group, they only talked about doing bad things and screwing other people over. Everything was going great until they asked Fran where he was living now. He happily responded without imagining the group would react the way they did. They were all petrified in shock. Little Fran Tiga didn't understand their reaction and asked them what was happening. The group told him that there were rumors about his house being a haunted house. It seems that the previous family man who had lived there was possessed by a demon and murdered his entire family. He then locked himself in the basement and let the water run until it became flooded and he drowned. When school ended for the day, Fran quickly returned to his new home and told his mother what he heard in school. But she didn't believe him, and that only made her angrier. First you break a mirror, and now you do everything you can to make us believe that our house is haunted? As much as you miss your good-for-nothing friends, we won't let you ruin your own future. Fran started crying, feeling completely helpless. His mother didn't believe him, since he had lied to her a few times in the past. He locked himself in his room and continued crying until he fell asleep. A few hours later, he was woken up by strange noises. Worried, he went out of his room and bumped into his parents, who were also hearing those sounds. They seemed to be coming from the living room. The mother and father slowly went down the stairs, expecting to find a burglar in the living room. Once they got there, they discovered that the noises were coming from behind the door leading to the basement. It seemed that something was hitting it from the inside. The father tried to force open the lock, but it was futile. He even tried to break open the door by kicking it with all his might, but to no avail. Whatever seemed to be hitting the door eventually stopped, and the couple went back upstairs in fear. They didn't want to worry Fran, so they told him that they forgot to close a window, and the wind knocked down some of the furniture in the living room. Soon after, when the mother went into her room and turned on the lights, she couldn't avoid screaming when she saw a terrifying message painted on the bed's headboard: "Get out of my house." They called the police and explained to them what happened, but when she was telling the home address to the agent who answered the call, the agent immediately hung up. Dumbfounded, the three members of the Tiga family looked at each other. What were they going to do now? They spent all of their savings money there. Suddenly, they heard a window break, making them understand that their top priority was to escape. They rushed out of the room, but unfortunately, Fran slipped and fell on the glass shards of the window that broke, stabbing him all over his body. The father worriedly helped him remove the glass shards lodged on his skin, and as he helped his son, the family perceived a strong burning smell. They turned around and saw how smoke was coming out of the only exit in the lower floor. They quickly went downstairs, praying that the flames wouldn't be near the entrance. But when they reached the last step, a column of fire blocked their path, preventing them from escaping. They were surrounded by fire, and their only way to escape now was to go down to the basement. The father hit the lock with all his might, managing to break it. He opened the door, and from the basement a hideous stench of rotting flesh came out, which made them all gag. Time was running out, so they went down to the basement regardless. They carefully went down the stairs, illuminated by the light of the fire behind them. And when they reached the bottom, they noticed that some water was still left from the previous flood. Then the door behind them slammed shut on its own. Now the Tiga family could only pray for the fire to not burn the door, and for them to survive until it all ended. Also, the stench in the basement was so horrible that they struggled trying not to throw up. A few moments later, they started to hear a voice. It was such a deep and sinister voice that it might as well have been the voice of the devil himself. The voice said they all made a terrible mistake invading his house, and would pay for not going away when they could. The family then heard a metallic sound. It was the sound of a water valve opening. They saw how the liquid started to quickly come out of a tube, and with such a strong pressure that it was impossible to approach the tube to block it. The water level started to rise. There were no windows, so it was just a matter of time before they all drowned. And when the water was covering their necks, the father felt how something grabbed his ankle and tried to sink him. As much as Fran and his mother tried to help him, that being was pulling him so strongly that it ended up sinking him. A few seconds later he drowned, and his body got lost in the depths of the room. After that, Fran and his mother were hugging, horrified, pleading to God to save them. But suddenly, the mother screamed in pain. Fran saw how the water started to become red, and witnessed how his mother lost all of her remaining strength, letting go of Fran. When little Fran finally accepted that he was going to die, the basement's door opened. All he could distinguish as his eyes closed was a firefighter uniform. Fran fell unconscious, but was rescued and woke up the next day. The rescue team had to wait for the water to drain in order to search for the bodies of the parents. However, they got a nasty surprise when they discovered that there was another body there. It was in an advanced stage of decomposition, as if it had been there for a long time. The father had teeth marks on his ankle, coming from an unknown creature. Meanwhile, one of the mother's legs had been bitten right off. The other body was holding a Bible. When opened, the book had all of its pages blank, except behind the cover where something was written. It was extremely difficult to decipher what it said, so writing experts had to be brought in to analyze it. It was a confession. The original family man who lived there, who was 57 years old back then, had fallen in love with the house. However, his family said they could not continue paying for it, that it was way too expensive for them, that it was best to look for a cheaper one. The man refused vehemently. As the months passed, they were sinking more and more into debt, until the wife told him during an argument that she was no longer willing to live like that, that she would leave and would take the children with her. The family man, possessed by the demon that made him fall in love with that house, murdered his entire family. He then took his own life by locking himself in the basement and letting it get flooded until he finally drowned. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it. And if you want to see more horror videos, subscribe to our channel.